Hi, my dears. Tonight's story is about Zoe, a graduate student who accidentally sends her secret crush confession to Professor Mara Voss, the woman who sees through every polished lie. Because sometimes one humiliating mistake becomes the first true sentence of an honest love story. The first thing I learned in graduate school was that intelligence could be performed so convincingly it began to rot from the inside. By October of my second year, I had become excellent at it. I could lean over a seminar table with a pen tucked between my fingers, not as if the word liminality had ever solved anyone's grief, and say things like, I wonder if the syntax itself is staging a failure of witness, while my stomach ate itself and my coffee went cold in the paper cup beside my notes. I could look awake after 3 hours of sleep. I could make a sentence sound expensive. I could write paragraphs so polished they reflected nothing back at me but my own fear. This was considered progress. My thesis, or the academic hostage situation I called my thesis, was on untranslatable grief in 20th century European fiction. The working title had changed 6 times. The most recent version, which I had written in a panic at 2 in the morning and then pretended to believe in, was After the Word Fails, Liminal Mourning, and the Ethics of Inexpressibility in Post-War European Prose. Priya said it sounded like something carved above the entrance to a haunted library. I said that was the most flattering review it had received. My advisor, Professor Mara Voss, had simply looked at the title through the bottom half of her reading glasses and said, "You are hiding behind the furniture." That was how she spoke. Not cruelly, exactly. Cruelty would have been easier. Cruelty could be dismissed as temperament or vanity or one of the many personality disorders academia rewarded if the person in question published enough. Professor Voss had no interest in theatrical brutality. She was precise. If she dismantled you, it was because your argument had left a door unlocked and she had found it. She held the chair in modern European literature at an age when most scholars were still begging committees for permission to exist, and she moved through the department with the composed fatigue of someone who had long ago discovered that competence was both armor and a punishment. Students feared her the way villagers fear a mountain. We respected the scale of her before we understood the weather. I was 24, which in graduate school meant I felt both ancient and embarrassing. I had a narrow room in an old brownstone chopped into graduate apartments, a kettle that screamed like a Victorian widow, a desk I had rescued from a curb, and a set of instincts so devoted to self-protection they often mistook joy for a security risk. I had dated men because men had asked, and because it seemed impolite to decline an entire category of human being without evidence. They had been good men, mostly. They had liked me in a beige, well-ventilated way. They had kissed me as if following instructions printed inside the lid of a box. I had responded with enough enthusiasm to avoid questions and then gone home relieved to be alone. At the time, I thought this meant I was focused, ambitious, too busy for desire. Graduate school offered many words for hunger that did not require admitting one was hungry. Then there was Professor Voss. She was 38, though at first I thought of her as ageless in the way frighteningly elegant women can seem ageless when they know exactly how to stand. She had dark hair she wore pinned low at the nape of her neck, not severely, but efficiently, as if beauty were an interruption she had learned to manage. Her clothes were always simple and devastating: charcoal trousers, silk blouses in colors that seemed chosen by weather, long wool coats that made the rest of us look like damp laundry. She had a mouth that rarely softened and eyes the color of winter afternoons, gray with some buried green that appeared when the light changed. Her hands were the real problem. I noticed them before I allowed myself to notice anything else. Long fingers, no rings, a small scar across one knuckle, the unhurried way she turned pages as if the book had agreed to wait. I noticed all of this with the furious detachment of a scholar identifying motifs. I was not attracted to her. I was observing the construction of authority. I was not watching the movement of her wrist when she underlined something on the board. I was studying pedagogy. I was not wondering whether her voice sounded different in the morning or whether the rare warmth in it was deliberate or accidental. I told myself, responding to a mentor's intellectual force. I repeated this to Priya so often she began to make a face whenever I said the word intellectual. Priya Nair had been my best friend since orientation, when we found each other standing beneath a banner that said, "Welcome future scholars," and silently agreed it looked like a threat. She studied contemporary diasporic poetry, wore eyeliner sharp enough to qualify as an argument, and possessed the gift of making reality sound less fatal. She was the person I called when my fellowship paperwork disappeared, when the radiator in my apartment began speaking Latin, when I received a margin comment from Voss that simply said, "No." Priya claimed that being supervised by Professor Voss had turned me into a Victorian governess with a Google Drive. I claimed she was projecting. Priya claimed I blushed whenever Voss used my last name. I claimed circulation was a medical phenomenon beyond my control. The seminar that semester met on Tuesday afternoons, in a room too warm for thought. It overlooked the East Quad, where undergraduates drifted past the windows in scarves and expensive indifference. There were 9 of us around the table, plus Voss at the head, though she rarely sat in a way that suggested rest. She perched, angled, leaned back just enough to make a silence feel intentional. The course was on fracture and witness in European modernism, which meant we spent 3 hours a week pretending to be surprised that history had broken language, and then arguing over the shards. Voss could listen with such frightening attention that people began editing themselves mid-sentence. When she turned that attention on me, I felt it physically. A pressure at the sternum, a heat under the skin, a childish wish to be brilliant and invisible at the same time. "Miss Hartwell," she said one afternoon, after I had made what I believed was a careful point about mourning in nadas, "do you believe the passage is refusing translation, or are you refusing the passage?" The table went still in the small, predatory way graduate seminars go still when someone else has been selected for vivisection. "I'm not sure those are mutually exclusive," I said, because panic sometimes put on a nice jacket and passed itself off as wit. Voss looked at me for a moment. Then one corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. A rumor of one. "Good. Then start there." I did. Badly at first. Then less badly. She kept me there for 10 minutes, dismantling every elegant escape route I built. By the end, I had said something embarrassingly plain about grief being less a silence than a language one cannot bear to recognize as language. The room shifted. I heard myself. I hated that she had gotten it out of me. I hated more that I felt seen. After seminar, while everyone gathered laptops with the desperate haste of people released from a minor hostage situation, Voss said, "Miss Hartwell, a word." My nervous system left my body and watched from a nearby shelf. She handed me back a prospectus draft with her notes in the margins. Her handwriting was compact, dark, and mercilessly legible. "There is a strong project here," she said. "You keep trying to make it harmless." I wasn't aware I had that much power over modernism. There it is again. What? The joke where an argument should be. I looked down. My face had gone hot. "Sorry. Don't apologize. Notice it." She paused, and the pause changed texture. "Your best sentence is on page 7. I flipped, disoriented. She had drawn a line beside a sentence I barely remembered writing. Grief remains untranslated not because it is too private, but because to translate it would make a demand on the living. "That one?" I said stupidly. "That one," she said. "It has blood in it. The rest is architecture." I carried that sentence home like contraband. This was before the voice note. Before I learned that mortification could have a pulse. Before Professor Mara Voss played my own voice back to me in her office and smiled as if she had discovered a key I had dropped without knowing I owned a door. The day it happened began with rain and a printer jam, which in retrospect feels like foreshadowing written by an unimaginative god. I had spent the morning in the library basement fighting with microfilm for a source that ultimately did not support my argument. unless my argument was that technology wished me harm. By 3, I had a headache, damp socks, and a seminar hangover from the previous afternoon, during which Voss had corrected my use of ineffable so calmly that I briefly considered changing fields to marine biology. Priya found me in the graduate lounge, lying on the sofa beneath a bulletin board advertising 3 lectures and 1 lost scarf. "You look dead," she said. "Thank you. I'm hoping tenure will revive me." She dropped into the chair beside me and handed over a cookie wrapped in a napkin. "Eat." What did Voss do now? I sat up because indignation required posture. She asked whether I was using absence as a concept or as a mood. Priya blinked. "Were you?" "That is not the point." "It might be exactly the point." "Whose side are you on?" "Yours, obviously, but sometimes your side needs a bibliography." I ate the cookie with the grim concentration of a woman applying medicine. Priya listened while I complained. I complained about the seminar room, my draft, the hierarchy of suffering in modernist criticism, the fact that Voss could say, "be specific," and make it sound like both an instruction and a moral failing. I complained because complaint was safer than confession. It allowed me to circle the thing without naming it. Priya watched me with steadily increasing amusement. "And?" she said. "And what?" "And the part where you stare at her hands like they owe you money." I nearly choked. "I do not." "You do. It's become a departmental concern." "No, it has not." "I personally am concerned, on behalf of the department." "She has expressive hands," I said, which was the kind of sentence a person says right before losing custody of her dignity. Priya's eyes widened. "Oh my God." "Don't." "You have a crush on Professor Voss." "I have an intellectual response to Professor Voss." "You want her to intellectually respond to you against a bookshelf." "Priya!" "What? I'm being supportive." "You are being sued." She grinned. "Say it. You'll feel better." "I will die." "Then haunt me, honestly." I refused to say it aloud there, in the graduate lounge, beneath the lost scarf. But later, walking back across campus with rain ticking against my umbrella and my phone in my hand, I sent Priya a voice note. We did this constantly because graduate school had reduced our ability to type full sentences, and because there was something soothing about letting panic ramble itself into comedy. I remember the exact path. Past the chapel, around the statue of a man whose name nobody knew, but whose pigeons were thriving, under the red maples half-stripped by November. The note began normally. "I am formally resigning from being perceived," I said. "Please forward my remains to the nearest archive." Then it deteriorated. I told her Voss was impossible. I told her no one should be allowed to be that intimidating before 4 in the afternoon. I said, and here history sharpened its knife. It is frankly unethical to be that unfairly beautiful while telling someone their thesis lacks a pulse. I laughed, breathless and embarrassed even alone. Also, I spent half of seminar watching her hands instead of taking notes, which is obviously a feminist reading practice and not a personal crisis. If she ever finds out, I will have to fake my death and apply to law school under a new name. I said more, not much more, but enough. Enough about the way she looked at me when I got something right. Enough about the smile that almost happened. Enough about how my body seemed to know things my mind kept filing under later. The note was 52 seconds long, a small, ridiculous weather system of desire and dread. I sent it as I reached my building, shaking rain from my umbrella. I watched the little blue bar complete. Then I saw the name above the message. Professor Mara Voss. There are moments in life when the body understands catastrophe before language does. Mine made a sound I had never made before, somewhere between a gasp and an apology to God. I stopped so abruptly that a cyclist swerved around me and shouted something educational. The phone remained in my hand, bright and obscene. Professor Mara Voss. Delivered. Not Priya. Voss, my advisor, my seminar professor, the woman whose approval I had been pretending not to crave, the woman whose hands I had just described as a scholarly emergency. I did what any mature graduate student would do. I opened Priya's contact and called her while making a noise only dogs should have been able to hear. "What happened?" she said, instantly alert. I sent it to her. Sent what to who? The voice note. There was a silence. Then, with horrifying softness, Priya said, "Which voice note?" "The voice note, Priya." Another silence. This one had furniture in it. "Oh," she said. "Oh. Okay, don't panic." I am already in the advanced stages of panic. Maybe she won't listen. She is a professor. Listening to things and destroying lives is her profession. Maybe she has notifications off. She has eyes, Priya. Maybe you can delete it? I stabbed at the screen. The message stared back, delivered and immovable. Technology, having delivered the bullet, refused to retrieve it. "I can delete it for me," I said. "That seems psychologically useful." "Do not send another message." "I should apologize." "No, you should put the phone down." "I should explain that I was joking." "You were not joking." "I was partially joking." "You were flirting with a felony level of metaphor." I paced my room, wet shoes squeaking on the floorboards. "I have to leave the program." "You do not have to leave the program. I can transfer." "To where? Shame University?" "I hear their funding is generous." Priya tried not to laugh. Failed. I heard it burst out of her and then become concern again. "Zoe, listen to me. It's mortifying. It is not fatal." "You didn't hear it." "I heard the rehearsal." The final version was worse, more polished. My humiliation had structure. "Did you say anything explicit?" "No." "Anything insulting?" "No, I called her intimidating." "She knows." "I called her beautiful." "She has a mirror." "I said I watched her hands." Priya inhaled through her teeth. "That part is artisanal. I am going to be expelled." "No one has ever been expelled for hand appreciation." "They'll create a policy." "Zoe." I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my raincoat. The radiator clanked as if laughing. My phone remained mute. No read receipt, no reply. That was worse. Silence allowed the imagination to populate itself freely. I imagined Voss listening in her office, expression cooling by degrees. I imagined her forwarding it to the department chair with the subject line, "concerning." I imagined myself becoming an anecdote told in low voices at conferences, the student who mistook lust for hermeneutics and was never heard from again. That night, I slept badly in 8-minute installments. At midnight, I drafted an apology that began, "Professor Voss, I sincerely regret," and then became so abject I deleted it out of respect for the English language. At 1, I drafted a shorter version. At 2, I considered pretending my phone had been stolen by a performance artist. At 3, I read the university's policies on faculty-student relationships, which was both irrelevant and extremely relevant, and discovered that bureaucracy could make even desire sound like a parking violation. At 4, I made tea and forgot to put water in the kettle. At 5, I found myself sitting on the floor beside my bed, laughing quietly, because terror, if held long enough, becomes absurd. By morning, she still had not replied. My tutoring session was scheduled for 11. Professor Voss's office was on the 4th floor, at the end of a corridor lined with portraits of former department chairs, who all looked as if they had personally invented dust. Her door was open. It was always open during office hours, a professional courtesy that somehow made entering feel more dangerous. The office itself was narrow and beautiful in the way of rooms shaped by one person's private order. Shelves from floor to ceiling, stacks of books on the radiator, a green banker's lamp, 2 framed prints, a small vase of eucalyptus on the sill. Her desk faced the door. Behind it, the window showed the wet branches of an oak tree and the gray shoulder of the library beyond. She looked up when I knocked. Miss Hartwell. My name and her voice did not reveal whether I was about to survive. Professor Voss, I said, stepping inside with the careful movements of a person approaching a sleeping animal. Close the door, please. I closed it. This felt significant. Everything felt significant. The angle of her pen, the steam rising from her mug, the fact that her hair was down for once, tucked behind one ear but not pinned. It made her look less formal and more dangerous, because the person under the roll had become visible by a fraction. Sit. I sat. She did not mention the note. She opened my chapter outline, which lay printed on her desk, and uncapped her pen. For one impossible second, I thought perhaps she truly had not listened. Perhaps the universe, embarrassed by its own cruelty, had intervened. Perhaps her phone lay beside the outline. She picked it up. My heart stopped being a metaphor and became an incident. Voss tapped the screen once. My voice filled the office. A quick reminder before we continue with the video, you can find much hotter and completely uncensored versions of these kinds of stories on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. Hot videos are uploaded there almost every day. I am formally resigning from being perceived. Please forward my remains to the nearest archive. I froze so completely I ceased to qualify as mammalian. The voice note continued. My own voice, tinny and cheerful with doom, complained about seminar. Voss watched me over the top of the phone. Not coldly. That was the worst part. Coldness would have given me a shape to resist. Her expression was composed, but there was something alive beneath it. Something I had never seen directed at me outside the brief flare of seminar victory. Then came the sentence. It is frankly unethical to be that unfairly beautiful while telling someone their thesis lacks a pulse. The room did not catch fire. I checked. My voice laughed from the phone. Also, I spent half of seminar watching her hands instead of taking notes, which is obviously a feminist reading practice and not a personal crisis. Voss stopped the recording before the fake my death portion, which I appreciated in the abstract and could not process in the moment. She set the phone down carefully. Then she looked at me and smiled. Not widely, not cruelly. Not the administrative smile of a woman preparing to explain consequences. It was small, controlled, and devastating, a curve at the corner of her mouth that made her entire face alter by 1 degree toward warmth. It suggested amusement, yes, but not ridicule. It suggested she had heard not merely the words, but the panic underneath them, the performance of comedy around a private truth. It suggested she was choosing, for reasons I could not yet understand, not to crush me. Your remains, she said, would be poorly organized in an archive. My mouth opened. No sound emerged. Professor Voss, I am so sorry. That was meant for Priya. Obviously. I mean, not obviously, since I sent it to you, which is the central problem. But I didn't intend. It was inappropriate, and I apologize completely, and I understand if you need to. Miss Hartwell. I stopped. If I believed myself unable to continue supervising you professionally, I would say so. The sentence landed with the clean weight of policy, but her eyes were not bureaucratic. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, I said. I know. The certainty of it undid me more than suspicion would have. She glanced down at my outline. Shall we begin? Begin? With your thesis. Unless you would prefer to discuss my hands, which I suspect would be less useful to your degree. My soul left my body, tripped over the rug, and lay face down somewhere near the bookshelf. I would prefer the thesis, I said faintly. Wise. And then she proceeded as if nothing had happened. Not entirely as if. That was the problem. On the surface, we discussed the structure of my first chapter. She told me the opening pages were overburdened with theory. She circled a paragraph and wrote, "Where are you?" in the margin, which felt personally aggressive for a question about scholarship. She challenged my use of Kalin, corrected a citation, suggested I move the nada section earlier. It was a normal tutoring session. If normal tutoring sessions took place after one party had heard the other confess to hand-related distraction. But underneath the ordinary, something had shifted. She was fractionally warmer, fractionally more present. When I made a nervous joke, she did not punish it immediately. When I answered well, she let the silence after it stretch just long enough for me to feel the answer settle. Once, reaching for a book beside her, she paused because my eyes had flicked traitorously to her hand. The smile did not return, but the memory of it did something worse. It hovered. At the end of the hour, she gathered my pages into a neat stack. "Your argument improves whenever you stop proving you deserve to make it," she said. "That sounds like a compliment with a trapdoor." "It is an observation." "Those are often worse." This time she almost smiled. "Send me a revised outline by Friday." "And Miss Hartwell?" I had already stood. "Yes?" "In future, check the recipient before sending voice notes." I closed my eyes for half a second. "That will be carved on my tombstone." "Too long for a tombstone." "I'll workshop it." "Do." The weeks that followed acquired a texture I did not know how to name. The voice note did not vanish. It became part of the room between us, like a piece of furniture neither of us acknowledged, but both navigated around with increasing skill. In seminar, Voss remained Voss. She could still reduce a sloppy claim to ash with one raised eyebrow. She still asked questions that made people revisit their relationship with language and, in some cases, posture. She still corrected me when I deserved it, and sometimes when I only half deserved it. But her attention had changed, or my awareness of it had. When she looked at me now, I felt not merely assessed, but known in a way I had not consented to and could not resent. My work changed first. That was the inconvenient miracle. Under her supervision, and perhaps under the unbearable pressure of being unable to hide completely, my thesis began to become good. Not polished. Good. There is a difference, though I had spent years confusing them. Polished work gleams over emptiness. Good work risks weather. Voss pushed me toward the ladder with a patience so unsentimental it almost passed for severity. And somehow, because I was irritated and because she was right, and because wanting to impress her had become tangled with wanting to survive myself, I rewrote. I cut the sentences that sounded like they had been assembled from conference programs. I stopped using "one might argue" when I meant "I think." I let certain passages hurt. I wrote about the shame of grief that cannot be made eloquent, the violence of demanding testimony from those who are still bleeding, the strange intimacy between reader and text when both understand that language fails differently depending on who is asking it to succeed. Voss marked the pages with fewer corrections and more questions. Her questions were worse. They entered the room after everyone else had gone to bed. One evening, near closing, I returned to my library carrel and found a book waiting there. No note. Just a slim volume of essays by a Hungarian writer whose work I had mentioned once in passing, placed precisely on top of my stack of photocopies. I knew it was from Voss because no one else in the department could make the absence of a note feel like a sentence. I opened it. A page had been marked with a receipt from the campus cafe. In the margin beside one paragraph, someone had made a small pencil line. The paragraph was about the impossibility of translating not words, but wounds, about how the original pain remains even when the sentence arrives beautifully in another language. I stood there in the humming library light, holding the book, and felt something in me answer before I could stop it. There were smaller moments. In seminar, a visiting doctoral candidate named Owen made a comment about my project being a little sentimental, perhaps, for a dissertation-level intervention, and I began preparing the tight smile women use when they are about to be polite at their own expense. Before I could speak, Voss looked at him. "Sentimentality is unearned feeling," she said. "Miss Hartwell's project, when she trusts it, is interested in the cost of earning feeling under conditions that punish expression. Those are not the same." Owen blinked. "Of course, I only meant..." I understood what you meant. That was all. She moved on, but I sat with my pen motionless over the page, heat rising behind my eyes for reasons I could not reduce to embarrassment. She had defended the work, not me. That distinction mattered and did not matter. It was the work because it was me, or the part of me I had managed to smuggle into the work under cover of theory. Being defended, there felt like being touched where no hand had reached. Then came the faculty reception. I was not supposed to attend, which is to say graduate students were technically welcome in the way weather is technically welcome through a broken window. The reception followed a lecture by a visiting novelist, whose work I disliked, but whose reputation required plastic cups of wine and small cubes of cheese. Priya wanted to go because her advisor would be there, and because she believed free food was reparations. I wanted to avoid it because Voss would likely be there, and because I had spent the afternoon rewriting a paragraph she had called elegant but evasive, a phrase I considered putting on my grave after shortening the archive joke. The reception was held in the old faculty hall, a high-ceilinged room with portraits, brass lamps, and the particular smell of institutional wine. Faculty clustered in small circles arranged by rank, grievance, and access to grant money. Graduate students hovered near the food, pretending not to hover. I accepted a glass of red wine and immediately worried it would stain my teeth in a way that revealed class anxiety. For 20 minutes, I did not see Voss. I spoke to Priya's advisor about train delays. I nodded at the visiting novelist while he explained his own novel to a woman who had reviewed it favorably. I ate a cube of cheese too large to manage gracefully. Then I heard Voss laugh. I had heard her amused. I had seen the edge of her smile. I had not heard her laugh fully. It was low and brief, not careless but unguarded, like a door opening in a house I had only seen from the road. I turned before I could stop myself. She stood near the far windows with two faculty members I barely knew, a glass of white wine in one hand. Her hair was down, falling just past her shoulders in dark waves that made the severe architecture of her face seem suddenly human. She wore a black dress under a long gray jacket, simple enough to be professional, fitted enough to make my thoughts lose academic rigor. She was listening to someone, head tilted, mouth still shaped by the laugh. The controlled version of her had not disappeared, but it had become one layer among others. She looked younger, not less powerful, more alive. But the room had its own machinery. 10 minutes later, I found myself beside a table of programs, just as Voss approached to set down her empty glass. There was no elegant escape that did not involve climbing through a window. "Miss Hartwell," she said. "Professor Voss." Her eyes moved over me once, quickly enough to be deniable, slowly enough to ruin me. "You attended." I was lured by cheese and professional obligation. A dangerous combination. I try to live recklessly. There it was again, the almost smile. "And what did you think of the lecture?" "That depends whether this is a test." "Everything is a test. Most things are not graded." I thought the lecture was confident. An adjective with a knife behind it. "I'm learning from the best." Her gaze sharpened, but there was warmth under it. "Careful." "With knives or flattery?" "Yes." Someone called her name from across the room. She glanced toward the sound, then back at me. For 1 second, the noise of the reception thinned. Her hand rested near mine on the table, close enough that I saw the small scar across her knuckle, the pale crescent of a thumbnail, the faint blue of a vein. I did not move. Neither did she. Then she stepped back. "Send the revised chapter when you're ready," she said. "That may be never." "No, it won't." She left before I could answer. I watched her rejoin the faculty circle, watched the professional mask settle again, and understood with sudden, painful clarity that the mask was not false. It was one truth among others. She was controlled because control had served her. She was severe because severity had built the room in which she could work. She was warm, rarely, and that rarity made warmth feel less like generosity than trust. The rupture came a week later because I panicked in the face of my own progress. This is something I can say now with the serene disgust of hindsight. At the time, I called it tightening the argument. I had written a chapter that frightened me. The early draft moved too close to the bone. It contained a passage about a character unable to translate her dead mother's letters because translation would make grief available to strangers. And somehow, without meaning to, I had written about my own mother's illness, though she was alive, and the year I spent at 17 making jokes in hospital corridors because everyone praised me when I was funny, and no one knew what to do when I was afraid. I had written about the shame of wanting to be understood by someone with the power to refuse understanding. I had written, unmistakably, if not explicitly, toward Voss. Then I read it the next morning and felt naked. So I did what I had been trained to do. I covered it. I added theory. I built scaffolding around every living sentence. I replaced I, even where no I had appeared. I turned pain into framework, longing into discourse, the pulse into a footnote. The final draft was technically elegant, structurally sound, and dead as a museum butterfly. I submitted it at midnight with the grim satisfaction of a person boarding up windows before a storm. Voss returned it 2 days later. She had made almost no comments. That alone terrified me. On the final page, beneath my conclusion, she had written one sentence in the margin. You know exactly what this is missing. No exclamation point, no elaboration, no mercy. I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I became angry with the force available only to people who know they have been caught. Who was she to write that? Who was she to know? Who was she to stand at the edge of my work and point to the door I had locked from the inside? I paced my apartment, chapter in hand, and delivered a brilliant imaginary speech about academic boundaries, feedback protocols, and the arrogance of assuming emotional access. Then I sat on the floor and cried, which undermined several key points. The next day, I went to Voss's office, hours without an appointment. I told myself I wanted clarification. This was a lie, but a respectable one. Her door was half open. She was alone, reading, glasses low on her nose. She looked tired, not dramatically tired. Worse, privately tired, in a way that made me feel I had entered without knocking, even though I had. Miss Hartwell, she said, looking up. Come in. I held up the chapter. I wanted to ask about your comment. I thought you might. That irritated me. Did you? Yes. I sat without waiting to be told, which was either confidence or collapse. It's not helpful. No. You know exactly what this is missing, is not feedback. It's a fortune cookie with tenure. Her eyebrows lifted. For a horrifying second, I thought I had gone too far. Then something like admiration passed through her expression and vanished. What would you prefer I had written? She asked. I don't know. Something actionable. Restore the paragraph you removed. My anger faltered. What paragraph? The one between the section on the letters and the discussion of translation as trespass. I looked down. You don't know that. I know the seam. The seam? The place where the chapter flinches. I swallowed. The office seemed suddenly too small for all the air inside it. Maybe it flinches because the material is difficult. Of course. Maybe not everything difficult needs to be dragged into the light because a professor enjoys rigor. That landed. I saw it in the slight stillness that came over her. Her hand, resting on the desk, stopped moving. No, she said after a moment. It does not. The softness in her voice should have calmed me. Instead, it made the honesty I had been holding back slip its leash. I can't write it properly with you reading it, I said. She looked at me. The sentence hung there, mild in grammar and catastrophic in meaning. I should have stopped. I did not. I know that sounds ridiculous. You're my advisor. That's the point. You're supposed to read it, but I can't stop hearing your voice in the margins. I can't stop wondering what you'll see. And the whole chapter is about things that don't survive being translated cleanly, and I keep trying to translate myself into something you'll approve of, and it's making the work dishonest. My breath shook. I hated that. I hated that she could see it. Voss said nothing. The silence extended long enough for me to understand what I had done. I had not confessed desire. Not directly. I had done something worse in our world. Confessed dependence, confusion, the erotic charge of being intellectually known. I had blurred the line without crossing it cleanly, which meant neither of us could pretend not to see the blur. Her face changed, but not in any direction I could read. The warmth shut away, not slammed, carefully closed. "Miss Hartwell," she said. My stomach dropped. "I think you should go home." That was all. No rebuke, no reassurance, no, "We will discuss this later." Just the sentence, quiet and final. I stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. "Right. Yes, of course. I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize." That almost broke me. "I'll revise the chapter," I said, though neither of us believed this was the central issue anymore. "Not today." I nodded, gathered my pages badly, and left. For 2 weeks, I became a creature composed of caffeine, humiliation, and defensive scholarship. I avoided her office. I attended seminar and spoke only when necessary, with the brittle competence of a woman determined to become furniture. Voss did not press. That was worse than pressing. She called on me no more or less than usual. She critiqued my comments fairly. She did not look at me with anger. She did not look at me with warmth. Professionalism, I discovered, could be a kind of winter. Snow arrived early that year, thin and wet, dissolving as soon as it touched the pavements. The campus took on the exhausted beauty of a place pretending to be a postcard, while everyone inside it quietly unraveled. Finals approached. Students filled the library until midnight. The graduate carols became small confessionals of despair. I lived among books and empty cups, wearing the same sweater so often Priya threatened to stage an intervention. The turn came on a Thursday, near the end of term. I remember because the library stayed open until 2, and because I had chosen the far reading room on the 3rd floor, the one with the long oak tables and green-shaded lamps. It was nearly empty by 11. Outside the tall windows, rain had replaced snow, streaking the glass until the reflections of lamps trembled like candles. I had my laptop open, Voss's margin comment beside it, and the excised paragraph in a separate document where it glowed with accusation. I read it again. It was not as embarrassing as I had feared. It was worse. It was alive. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and began, slowly, to rebuild the chapter around the place it had flinched. The first sentences were clumsy. Then less clumsy. I forgot for almost 20 minutes to be afraid. I wrote about grief as a form of address without guarantee of reply. I wrote about translation not as rescue, but as intimacy undertaken at risk. I wrote that some feelings resist language, not because they are vague, but because language, once spoken, creates obligations. To hear is to become responsible. Better. I startled so violently my knee hit the underside of the table. Voss stood at the end of the row, a stack of books in one arm, her coat damp at the shoulders. The library light made her look both very tired and very real. Not mythic, not untouchable. A woman working late because she had made a life around difficult books, and perhaps did not always know how to leave them. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I thought I was alone." So did I. It was absurd, the two of us in that vast room pretending coincidence had not been overburdened with meaning. She could have left. I could have closed my laptop. Neither of us did. "I can move," I said. "Why?" "In case..." I stopped. "In case the reading room becomes aware of departmental policy." Despite myself, I laughed. It came out rusty. Her expression softened by a fraction. "You don't have to move," she said. "May I?" She indicated the chair across from me. My heart, traitorous and undereducated, said yes before my mouth did. Of course. She sat, not beside me, across. The table between us was wide, oak, respectable. It might as well have been a border treaty. For several minutes, we worked in silence. She opened one of her books and made notes on a pad. I stared at my screen, pretending the proximity of her did not reorganize the chemistry of the room. Rain moved against the windows. Somewhere far off, a cart squeaked. The clock over the door advanced with theatrical slowness. Eventually, without looking up, she said, "I owe you an apology." My fingers stilled. I should not have written that comment without offering a clearer path back into the work. I looked at her. She was still looking at her notes, but her pen had stopped moving. "I was angry," I said. "I know." "Do you always know?" "No." She glanced up. "Only when you are obvious." I should have defended myself. Instead, I smiled faintly. "That's worse than yes." "It is more specific." The silence after that was not easy, but it was no longer frozen. "I didn't mean to make things difficult," I said. "I know that too." I took a breath. "When I came to your office, I wasn't trying to, manipulate anything." "No. I just couldn't separate the work from—" I stopped, because language had led me here and then fled. "From being seen," she said. I looked at her then. Really looked. The professional mask was there, but thinner, worn by fatigue and the hour. She seemed to be choosing each word not as a professor correcting a student, but as a person crossing ice. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. "That can be frightening." "You don't seem frightened by much." A small smile, not amused. "That is because you usually see me in rooms where fear would be inconvenient." The admission entered me quietly. Voss closed her book. "I told you to go home because the conversation had reached a point where I could not continue it responsibly in that office, in that role, with you upset, and me—" She looked toward the windows. Rain trembled down the glass. "Not indifferent." The words did not announce themselves loudly. They did not need to. My body heard them first. Not indifferent. I held very still. She looked back at me. "That is not a confession you need to answer. In fact, it is one I should be careful making at all. But I will not pretend coldness where there is only restraint." My mouth had gone dry. Restraint sounds exhausting. It is. The honesty of it passed between us. Dangerous and relieving. I should have said something elegant. Instead, I said, "I have been trying to make myself stop." Her eyes lowered briefly to the table, to the space between our hands, then lifted again. "So have I." The room did not alter. No music swelled. No books flew from the shelves in scandalized formation. The rain continued. The lamps hummed. Yet nothing in my life remained arranged as it had been 1 minute earlier. "We can't," I said, "because someone had to put the wall where we could both see it." "No," she said, "not like this." Not like this. The phrase mattered. It did not erase the wall. It placed a gate somewhere beyond the present. "My grades aren't submitted," I said. "I know." "My thesis?" "I know. You're my advisor." "For the moment." I stared at her. She folded her hands on the table. "There are procedures. If you want another advisor, I can help arrange it without drama and without explanation beyond fit. If you prefer to finish the semester and then decide, we do that. Nothing happens because of pressure, gratitude, confusion, or a rainy library at midnight." "You make it sound so orderly." "It is not orderly." Her voice softened. "That is why order matters." I almost laughed, almost cried. "You're very good at being ethical in a way that ruins the romance." This time she did smile, tired and real. "I have spent years cultivating that talent." The tension eased enough for breath. Not gone, never gone, but held differently now. No longer a monster under the bed. A fact on the table. She nodded toward my laptop. May I hear what you wrote? The question startled me more than any confession. It's rough. I assumed. Generous. Accurate. I looked at the screen. My paragraph waited, imperfect and alive. Before, reading my work aloud to Voss had felt like undressing under fluorescent light. That night, it felt like opening a window. I began to read. At first, my voice shook. Then the sentences took over. I read about a woman translating letters from a language she had tried to forget, about the terror of discovering that grief had not been silent but patient, waiting for her to learn the conditions under which she could hear it. I read the line I had removed twice and restored once. What cannot be translated does not vanish. It remains beside the translated thing, breathing. When I finished, I did not look up immediately. The silence was long. Finally, Voss said, "There you are." It was not praise. It was better. It was recognition. I looked at her then and saw an expression I had never seen on her face. Not approval, exactly. Not desire, though desire was there, quiet and disciplined. It was wonder, restrained because restraint was still necessary, but present. She looked at me as if the work had given me back to myself in front of her. I swallowed. Is it too much? Yes, she said. Keep it. I laughed softly, and this time it did not hide anything. We worked until the library announced closing in, a voice that made scholarship sound illegal. Voss walked me downstairs, but not out. Even then, we observed the small formalities like lanterns placed along a dangerous path. At the door, beneath the stone archway, we paused. Rain fell hard over the quad. She opened her umbrella. "Do you have one?" she asked. "In my office?" "That is not helpful here." "No." She looked at the rain, then at me. "Come on." We walked under the same umbrella across the slick pavement, not touching except when the path narrowed and her shoulder brushed mine. The contact was slight, almost nothing, and I felt it everywhere. The campus at night belonged to another city. Lamps blurred gold, windows glowed in scattered offices, wet branches shone black against the sky. Neither of us spoke until we reached the humanities building. "You'll send me the chapter?" she asked. "Yes. Tomorrow, not tonight." I might be possessed by productivity. Exercise it. Sleep. That sounds medically advisable. Miracles occur. I turned to go, then stopped. "Professor Voss?" Her expression shifted at the title. Maybe because of what had been said. Maybe because titles had begun to feel both necessary and inadequate. Yes? Thank you for not pretending." The rain tapped the umbrella above us. For a moment, she looked unbearably tired of pretending. "You're welcome," she said. The end of the semester arrived with the blunt force of administrative calendars. I submitted the chapter. Voss returned it with comments that were rigorous, specific, and, in one margin beside the paragraph I had read aloud, a small check mark. I stared at that check mark for an unreasonable amount of time. It became, in my private mythology, the opposite of the voice note. A mark that said I had meant to send this and had finally sent it to the right place. We navigated the remaining days with care. Nothing happened. That sentence sounds empty unless you understand how full nothing can be. Nothing happened in her office, where the door stayed open and our meetings remained about work. Nothing happened in seminar, where she called me Miss Hartwell and challenged my claims and treated me neither better nor worse than anyone else. Nothing happened in the hallway, where our greetings were brief and professional. Nothing happened by accident because both of us refused to let accident carry what choice should. But under the nothing, knowledge lived. Grades were submitted on a Friday. I know because I checked the portal 17 times between breakfast and lunch, as if bureaucracy might blink and rearrange my fate. My seminar grade appeared at 1:12 p.m. My thesis progress evaluation followed at 2:47. Satisfactory with distinction. I sat at my desk and stared until the words stopped being words and became permission, though permission for what remained unclear. At 3:05, an email arrived from Professor Voss. Miss Hartwell, your revised chapter is the strongest work you have submitted to date. The project is ready for its next stage. If you still wish to discuss advising arrangements for the spring, I am available Monday at 10 or Wednesday at 4. I read it 4 times. It was professional. It was brief. It contained nothing improper. It also contained, in the phrase, if you still wish, a door left unlocked. I chose Wednesday at 4 because choosing Monday felt like running. The meeting was strange and calm. The department was nearly empty, hollowed out by break. Voss's office looked different in winter light. The shelves darker, the eucalyptus replaced by a small bowl of clementines. The door remained open at first. We discussed the practicalities. Another faculty member, Professor Adler, could formally supervise the administrative side of my thesis in spring. His work overlapped enough to make sense, and Voss could remain on the committee only if appropriate, and only at a distance determined by policy. No decisions needed to be rushed. No doors needed to slam. My funding would not be affected. My work would not be punished for our honesty. She laid it all out with such care that I almost cried from the unromantic beauty of logistics. You've thought about this, I said. Yes. For how long? Her eyes met mine. Since the voice note. Heat rose in my face. That long? In different ways. A pause. At first, because I was concerned you would feel unsafe or embarrassed in a way that damaged your work. I was embarrassed in a way that damaged several household objects, but not the work. I'm glad to hear the distinction. And later, she looked down at the pen in her hand, turned it once, then set it aside. Later, because I thought about the voice note more than I should have. My breath caught. The office, familiar as a recurring dream, seemed to hold still around us. She stood then and crossed to close the door. Not quickly, not secretly. With the calm of a woman making a choice and accepting that choices had weight. When she returned to her chair, she did not sit behind the desk. She sat in the chair beside it, angled toward me, leaving the desk no longer between us, but still present, witness and reminder. What did you hear in it? I asked. The question came out quieter than I intended. She considered me with that precise attention I knew so well, but without the old armor fully in place. I heard someone making herself ridiculous in order to tell the truth safely. I laughed once, unsteadily. That sounds like me. I heard desire, yes. I also heard terror of desire. I heard a young woman who had convinced herself wanting could be footnoted into abstraction. You got all that from 52 seconds? I am very good at close reading. That is the worst flirting anyone has ever done to me. The smile came, fuller than usual, and it changed her completely. I suspect you deserved it. I looked at her hands because some habits became history and then tenderness. They rested loosely in her lap, no performance in them. I heard myself, I said. After, when you played it, I thought I'd only be horrified, but I heard myself telling the truth, and it was awful because I sounded happy. Scared, but happy. Like wanting you was the first honest thing I had said all semester. Her expression softened, not with triumph, never that, but with something like sorrow for the time we had spent being careful and gratitude that care had not killed the thing it protected. I need to say something plainly, she said. You are no longer in my seminar. Your grades are submitted. We are arranging your advising so that I do not hold power over your progress in the same way. Even so, the difference in age and position is real. I do not want admiration, gratitude, or the intensity of graduate school to disguise themselves as choice. They aren't. You may feel certain now and differently later. So may you. That surprised her. Then she nodded. Yes. I'm not asking you to make it simple, I said. I'm asking you not to decide I'm too fragile to know what I want. The words came from somewhere steadier than my fear. I felt the truth of them as I said them. Voss did too. I saw it in the way she became very still, not to retreat, but to listen. No, she said. You are not fragile. I smiled faintly. Highly reactive, maybe. Frequently. Rude. Accurate. We sat with the door closed and the world beyond it intact. Nothing rushed in. No grand declaration arrived to rescue us from ambiguity. Instead, we discussed what would happen next with a seriousness that felt, oddly, more intimate than fantasy. I would meet with Adler after break. Voss would step back from direct supervision. We would not begin anything in secret. We would give the transition room to be real, not cosmetic. We would be careful with the department, not because shame belonged to us, but because care did. When I left, she walked me to the door. There was no touch. Not yet. But her voice followed me into the hall. Zoe. It was the first time she had used my first name. I turned. She seemed to understand what she had done only after doing it. The faintest color rose along her cheekbones. This, I discovered, was a sight capable of rearranging a life. Safe travels over break, she said. Thank you, Mara. Her name in my mouth changed the air. She inhaled softly. Then she nodded once, accepting both the risk and the gift of it. I walked down the hall without looking back because if I had looked back, I would have returned, and we had promised not to let longing make all our decisions for us. When I returned in January, the campus was hard with cold. The river beyond town had frozen along the edges. My apartment smelled faintly of dust and old heat. I met Professor Adler, who was kind, scattered, and enthusiastic in a way that made me miss Mara's exacting terror with alarming tenderness. The advising change went through without drama. In the official language of the department, it was about evolving project fit. In the unofficial language of my life, it was about making room for truth without letting truth become theft. Mara and I saw each other first in public, at the bookshop in town. It was called Wren and Bell, a narrow place with warped wooden floors, a cat who disliked men with backpacks, and a cafe in the back that served tea in mismatched cups. We had chosen it because it was off campus, but not hidden, ordinary enough to resist melodrama. I arrived early and spent 10 minutes pretending to browse translations while reading the same back cover upside down. She came in wearing a dark wool coat and a blue scarf I had never seen before. Her hair was tucked under the scarf, wind loosened around her face. For a moment, I simply watched her enter a room where she was not Professor Voss unless someone made her so. She looked around, found me, and smiled. Not the controlled office smile. A real one, small but unguarded, as if happiness had caught her before she could edit it. Zoe, she said. Mara. The names stood between us like two candles. We walked through the shelves with the awkward grace of people learning a new choreography. She recommended a novel and then immediately criticized its ending. I accused her of being incapable of leisure. She said leisure was too often an alibi for weak structure. I said I would embroider that on a pillow. She laughed quietly, and the cat, who had been judging us from a stack of art books, flicked one ear. In the cafe, we sat at a small table near the window. Snow began to fall, light and indecisive. We talked for 2 hours. Not about policy, not mostly. About books we loved before we knew how to defend loving them. About childhood reading. About the first time she had realized scholarship could be a way of staying near the dead without pretending they answered. Her father had died when she was 26, she told me, suddenly and without narrative elegance. For years afterward, she had written only about absence in languages not her own because English had become too close to the wound. I stayed in academia, she said, turning her cup slowly, because it gave me rituals for attention. Read carefully, return to the sentence, Do not look away simply because looking hurts. It was not enough, but it was something. I listened. I did not rush to comfort her. I had learned from her, maybe, that attention could be a form of tenderness when it did not try to fix the thing it touched. "What about you?" she asked. "Why grief?" I could have made the old joke. Instead, I thought of my mother in hospital corridors, of my own bright voice performing resilience for adults who looked relieved when I made things easier. I thought of all the years I had mistaken being manageable for being loved. "Because I was good at making fear sound clever," I said. And I think part of me wanted to know what would happen if I stopped. What happened? I looked at her across the small table, at the woman who had heard a ridiculous voice note and chosen not to make me smaller. This, apparently, her eyes warmed. After that, we saw each other slowly. That adverb mattered. Slowly, because speed would have been easier and less honest. Slowly, because the world did not vanish just because we wanted it to. Slowly, because I had spent years calling avoidance discipline and did not want to mistake hunger for freedom. We walked in town. We met for tea. We went to a small gallery where Mara stood before an abstract painting for 7 minutes and then said, "It is either profound or beige," which made me laugh so hard a guard looked over. She came once to my apartment and stood in the doorway with a bottle of wine and an expression of such careful uncertainty that I loved her a little for being nervous. "It's small," I warned. "I have seen offices assigned to adjuncts. This is palatial." The radiator screams. "Many do." I had cleaned in a frenzy, which meant the apartment looked like a person pretending not to own laundry. She noticed the books stacked beside my bed, the kettle, the postcards above my desk, the cheap lamp with the crooked shade. She did not inspect. She received. There is a difference. We drank wine from mismatched mugs because I owned only one intact wine glass, and she sat on my narrow sofa with the composed courage of a woman lowering herself onto furniture that might not forgive her. We did not kiss that night. We came close. Her hand rested on the cushion between us, palm down, and mine rested near it. The space between our fingers became its own climate. We talked about a film, then about teaching, then about nothing. At one point, she reached to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I followed the movement with such obvious attention that she paused. "Still a feminist reading practice?" she asked. I covered my face. "I hate that you remember my worst sentence." "I remember many of your sentences." "That was not one I submitted for evaluation." "No," her voice lowered. "It was one you meant." I looked at her then. The room felt very warm. Outside, a siren passed and faded. Inside, the radiator clicked like an impatient chaperone. "Mara," I said. Her hand turned, palm up. I placed my fingers in hers. It was the first deliberate touch. Not accidental. Not hidden under an umbrella. Not brushed in a hallway. Her hand was warm and steady, though when my thumb moved over the small scar on her knuckle, I felt her breath catch. We sat like that for a long time, holding hands on my ridiculous sofa, the restraint between us no longer a wall, but a way of honoring the fact that everything we did now mattered. When she left, she kissed my cheek at the door. It was brief, almost formal, and it burned there for an hour, and the first real kiss happened in the rain, because apparently my life had aesthetic commitments. It was late February, too warm for snow, too cold for spring. We had gone to a reading at Wren and Bell, a poet Mara admired, and I pretended not to be intimidated by. Afterward, the crowd thinned into the wet street. Mara offered to walk me toward campus. I had an umbrella. She did not. This time, I opened mine. "Come on," I said. She looked at the umbrella, then at me. "A reversal." "I'm developing range." We walked slowly. The town shone around us, windows golden, pavement black with rain. We spoke of the reading, then of Priya's upcoming conference presentation, then of my chapter, which Adler had praised with the bewildered enthusiasm of a man discovering I had been competent all along. Under the umbrella, our shoulders touched. Not by necessity, by choice. Near the old footbridge over the river, Mara stopped. The water below was dark and swollen with thaw. Campus lights blurred on the surface. Rain tapped the umbrella above us in a soft, relentless rhythm. "I have thought about this more than I should have," she said. "The rain?" The voice note. I turned toward her. "Still?" "Still." She looked almost amused at herself. "Less as evidence, more as origin. Origin stories are dangerous. They invite costumes. I refuse a cape. You'd look terrifying in one. I look terrifying in most things, according to departmental folklore. That's because they lack imagination." Her smile appeared, then faded into something more serious. "I thought about what you sounded like, not the content, though the content was memorable." I made a suffering noise. "The aliveness," she said. "You sounded embarrassed and delighted and furious with yourself for being delighted. I envied it." "You envied my catastrophic lack of recipient awareness?" "I envied the part of you that could still be surprised by wanting." The rain seemed to grow quieter, though it did not. "What did you want?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. No office, no desk, no seminar table, no title standing close enough to overhear. Just Mara in the rain, careful and unguarded, the bridge lights catching in her eyes. "At first," she said, "to protect us both from it. And now? Now I want to ask whether I may kiss you." The question was so plain that for a second I could not answer. I had imagined drama, perhaps because drama asks less courage than clarity. I had imagined being swept, seized, interrupted by desire too powerful to negotiate. Instead, she asked. She gave me the dignity of my own yes. That, more than any grand gesture, undid me. "Yes," I said. Then, because I was still myself. "Please, before I start analyzing the syntax." Mara laughed softly and stepped closer. The kiss was quiet. That is the first truth. Not timid, not cold, not symbolic. Quiet in the way a door closes when the people inside do not want the whole house involved. Her hand rose to my face, fingers warm along my jaw, and she kissed me as if asking and answering at once. I had been kissed before, but this made the category feel poorly named. There was no performance in it, no beige wall, no instructions in a box. There was rain, and her thumb brushing my cheek, and the soft, controlled sound she made when I kissed her back with less control than either of us had planned. Heat moved through me, startling and certain. My free hand found the lapel of her coat and held there, not pulling exactly, just refusing to let the moment become theoretical. When we parted, we stayed close. Her forehead nearly touched mine. The umbrella had tilted, and rain wet one shoulder of her coat. "You're getting soaked," I said. "So are you." "I'm making an observation." "Those are often worse," she murmured. I laughed, and the laugh shook because I was happy. Scared, but happy. The old phrase returned to me with such tenderness I almost told her. Instead, I kissed her again. Less quietly. Still careful, but not cautious. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, and the world narrowed to rain, breath, the warmth of her mouth, the astonishing fact of being wanted by someone who had seen me clearly and not looked away. Afterward, we walked the rest of the way slowly, our hands linked beneath the umbrella. At the edge of campus, we stopped because old borders still existed, though they no longer ruled unchallenged. She would go back toward town. I would go to my apartment. We would not pretend patience had become unnecessary because a kiss had made it beautiful. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow." "Send me the paragraph you mentioned. Not for supervision," she added. "For me?" I smiled. That distinction will thrill the compliance office. "Then send me a sentence." "I can do that." "And Zoe?" "Yes?" Her hand tightened once around mine. It was never only the note. I carried that home through the rain like a lantern. Spring came reluctantly, then all at once. The quad filled with wet grass and reckless undergraduates. The trees put out small green leaves, tender as new thoughts. My thesis became a different creature under Adler's official supervision and Mara's unofficial distance. I worked harder than I ever had, but not because I was trying to become worthy of being read, because the work was worthy of my honesty. There were still bad days. Days when every sentence sounded borrowed. Days when I feared I had mistaken emotional exposure for insight. Days when the old habits returned, offering polished escape. But I recognized them sooner. I knew the seam. Mara and I built something in the margins of ordinary life. We went to Wren and Belle, so often the cat accepted us as part of the furniture. We cooked once in her apartment, which was on the second floor of a brick house near the river, and contained more lamps than seemed necessary until evening fell, and every room turned amber. Her books were everywhere, but unlike her office, they were not arranged for professional survival. They sprawled. Novels beside cookbooks, poetry on the kitchen windowsill, an old mystery face down on the arm of a chair. There was a blue bowl by the door for keys, a photograph of her father on a shelf, a plant she claimed not to care about but watered with suspicious devotion. The first time I stood in that apartment, I understood what the prompt of my longing had been reaching toward when it asked for somewhere that belonged only to them. Not a secret place, not a hiding place, a room where neither of us was performing the version required by institution or fear. She made pasta badly and salad beautifully. I teased her about the pasta. She threatened to assign me a comparative analysis of sauces. We ate at her small table with the windows open to the sound of rain beginning again, because weather had clearly joined our relationship as a recurring character. Later, I sat on her floor with my back against the sofa, reading a paragraph aloud from my conclusion while she listened from beside me, one hand resting near my shoulder. Not supervising, listening. When I finished, she leaned down and kissed the top of my head. "That," she said, "is true." I closed my eyes. Once, those words from her would have felt like a grade. Now they felt like a home I had helped build. We spoke often about the difficult things because not speaking would have made them larger. The age difference, the department, the fact that power does not disappear simply because two people behave carefully. Mara never allowed romance to erase responsibility, and I loved her for it, even when it irritated me. I never allowed responsibility to become a euphemism for fear, and she loved me for that, though it made her sigh and remove her glasses in the manner of a woman confronting an especially persuasive footnote. We were not simple. We were not reckless. We were also not ashamed. That night, after dinner with Priya and too many celebratory fries, I went home and wrote. Not because a deadline demanded it. Not because I wanted Mara to admire me. Not because fear had disguised itself as discipline. I wrote because the sentence was there, and I was finally willing to meet it. My apartment window was open. Spring rain softened the street below. On my desk lay the old printed chapter, with the margin comment that had once broken me open. You know exactly what this is missing. Beside it lay a newer page, clean except for my own handwriting at the top. Tell the truth before you decorate it. I thought of the woman I had been the day I sent the voice note, walking in rain, laughing at herself because desire had become too bright to look at directly. I wanted to reach back and take her phone gently from her hand. I wanted to tell her that the mistake would not ruin her. It would expose her, yes, but exposure and ruin are not the same. I wanted to tell her that being heard is dangerous, and so is never being heard. I wanted to tell her that one day Mara Voss would stand in her kitchen barefoot, hair loose, reading a badly translated instruction manual for a coffee grinder with the same grave attention she gave to modernism. And Zoe would laugh until Mara kissed the laughter from her mouth. I wanted to tell her that truth would not make life simple, but it would make it hers. My phone buzzed. A message from Mara. One sentence. Are you writing? I looked at the page, at the words gathering there without armor. Yes, I wrote back. Really writing. Her reply came a moment later. Good. I set the phone beside the old chapter and returned to the sentence. Outside, rain moved through the new leaves. Inside, the room held its small, imperfect light. I wrote about grief and translation, about the obligations created by listening, about the strange mercy of being seen before one feels ready and loved without being made smaller. I wrote until the fear became only one voice among many, not the loudest. I wrote until the performance fell away. I wrote until I could feel the difference, at last, between sounding true and being true. And when I reached for language, it reached back.